You've all been introduced to me, right? I'm Kelly. I'm Kelly.
This is the founder of the Grey Havens, Kelly Kelly.
The fact that I'm the founder of Grey Havens is really sort of an historical accident because these people here are Grey Havens, and even if you've just joined us, you are Grey Havens. You will be assimilated. Resistance is futile. So, okay, let's get started. I don't want to keep you too long because I'm sure you're all ready for dinner, but thank you very much for sticking with us to the very end of the first day of Real Myth. I'm going to forego the microphone because I am quite loud. Know thyself. So everybody can hear me?
Yes.
All the way in the back? Okay, I thought so. All right, so I've told you quite a bit about myself today. One of the things that has come up a couple of times is that I was a student of religion at Naropa University in Boulder, and Naropa University is the only Buddhist-inspired, accredited Buddhist-inspired university in the United States, and it aims to provide its students with a contemplative education. There's a lot of controversy even at Naropa about what a contemplative education is, but I will give you my definition of contemplative. Contemplative is attention to the self. That's also my definition of philosophy. Attention to the self, particularly attention to what you pay attention to, and to how your mind works when you're paying attention. So let me tell you my most embarrassing Naropa story. I might lose my place and have to look at my notes occasionally, but I often forget. My most embarrassing Naropa story. I was in a wonderful class called Contemplative Islam, because everything at Naropa has the word contemplative in front of it. Contemplative Islam. And I was studying with, the professor was brilliant, his name was Sheikh Kazaruni, and he asked this question, and it was one of those historically unanswerable theological questions. I don't remember exactly what it was, but it was something like, if God is good and also omnipotent, then why is there evil? He didn't pause for an answer, because he was asking the question to illustrate the fact that it was unanswerable. But I was a new grad student. I was really enamored with Naropa. At Naropa, everybody bows very formally at the beginning and end of every class. Everybody always sits in a circle. It's always a circle. If you got a bunch of Naropa students in this room right now, they would get really anxious about all the sharp corners. They would sit in a circle naturally. So this professor asked this unanswerable question. I'm very enthusiastic. He doesn't pause. My hand shoots up in the air. He keeps talking. My hand stays up in the air. And of course he keeps talking because it's an unanswerable question. It's a mystery, right? And so finally I go all Hermione on him and I say, I know! And you could have heard a pin drop. And then suddenly, from somewhere in the circle, I don't know where, I heard, this better be good. And as it turned out, I don't remember exactly what I said, but I do remember that it wasn't good. It wasn't good. So if I did graduate from Naropa with a tendency to bow at staff meetings, with a mild anxiety around sharp corners, I also hope that I graduated from Naropa with a willingness to let the mystery be. A willingness to let the mystery shine full in my face, but resist the need to explain it away. But my question is this. Is there really no way to know the mystery? How do we feel things that we cannot say? Are we only able to be certain about things that are replicable under laboratory conditions? Can we even be certain about those things? Is it the choice between becoming ultimate skeptics or taking the word of those who climbed the spiritual mountain ahead of us? Well, it depends on what you mean by knowing. So what I'm going to tell you next, I've adapted from the works of thinkers like the physicist Henri Bortoft, who is an interpreter of Johann Wolfgang von Goethe, who wrote Faust, and the philosopher Pierre Hadot. There's intellectual knowing. There's knowing that uses the analytic faculty. It's understanding something by taking it apart, by reducing it to smaller terms. And then there's sensory or aesthetic knowing. Knowing that understands how things fit together as an indivisible unity. This is holistic knowing. So to paraphrase G.K. Chesterton, we can try to know the ocean by getting the ocean in our heads, and our heads will split. Or we can swim in the ocean and know its perils and delights in this way. We are all always swimming in the ocean of ideas. We got a taste of this in our keynote speech this morning. We're all always swimming in an ocean of meaning, whether we know it or not. So to paraphrase C.S. Lewis, we can taste truth. We get to know things intimately, like we know a friend, like people in the Grey Havens group and Grey Havens YA get to know each other by getting together every week and spending time with each other. We can know and that kind of knowing is connaître, the French word connaître, which is to be familiar with, rather than savoir, to know as a fact. But we don't have that distinction in English. So we can also know intuitively, like we know that something's wrong in our bodies even though we don't have measurable symptoms, or like we know our thoughts even though we can't make a machine that thinks. And we can also know infinitely, recognizing that the cosmos is infinite, not just in space, but in nuance. Turning the page, sorry. And the discoveries that we can make about the cosmos are also infinite. And we can rest in that knowledge like floating in an ocean. Sometimes it can be as simple as getting a joke. And it's this kind of implicit knowing that I'm referring to when I talk about spiritual awakening, about a contemplative awakening. Spiritual awakening, whether you call it samadhi or revelation, does not have to mean a state of perfect, all-knowing, never-ending bliss. It can come to us in flashes of insight, in moments of just getting it. In his book, Poetic Diction, Owen Barfield, who we heard about this morning, who is a friend of C.S. Lewis and J.R.R. Tolkien, describes the difference between creative and contemplative consciousness, or what he calls the creative and contemplative mood of a poet who's writing poetry. So it's a difference between the receptive and the critical, between the part of us that can receive inspiration and work in that way, and the part of us that needs to criticize it and needs to edit it. So what happens when these oscillate very quickly? When we move out of the receptive mode that allows us to pick up on inspiration and into the personal critical mode that allows us to shape that product of inspiration, but we do it very quickly. It's something like freedom. We get to swim in the ocean of knowing, and we get to shape that knowledge. Samuel Taylor Coleridge said that we become aware of our own creative activity as the creative activity of the universe. The universe is acting in us, as us, and we are also part of the universe, and we can shape that activity. It's a perfect loop. In fact, it's not just a loop, it's a spiral, because it gets bigger and bigger all the time. Tolkien calls this sub-creation. God is the creator, and humanity is the sub-creator. When Tolkien talked about or wrote about writing The Lord of the Rings and its surrounding legendarium, he described it as something like writing down what was already out there somewhere. But he was also a meticulous editor, and he never felt that his work was quite complete. This is the awakening experience. It's the experience of being at one with everything. What did the Buddhist say to the hot dog vendor? Make me one with everything. Yes, it's at one-ment. That's a breaking down of the word atonement that Barfield uses, and it's also been used by Joseph Campbell and others, at one-ment. The experience of having knowledge flow through you, of receiving it and recognizing it and even shaping it, but in a way that does not dominate it. Like the classic example of the sculptor who chips away at the stone to reveal the sculpture that wants to emerge from within. Now, because everything is connected, everything is actually more than connected. Everything is one ocean with myriad waves. The particular is always an expression of the universal. Think of holograms. Holograms are an incredibly complex information storage system where all of the information to create the whole is stored in every part. David Bohm, the physicist, uses this example, and so does Henri Bortoft. So you really can see the universe in a grain of sand. The particular is a metaphor for, or more accurately, a symbol of, the universal. I've got to turn my page now, sorry. It is a symbol that participates in the whole. The whole pours itself into the symbol. The universal pours itself into the particular. Jokes and riddles are these kinds of symbols. They allow us to taste the kind of knowing that is beyond words. They allow us to taste awakening. Poetry does this as well, and so does myth, and so does the sincere practice of philosophy, which Barfield calls the most wakeful part of a people's consciousness. But let's not discount the heart-easing, ego-clearing power of a joke. So before I get too far with this idea, let me try to give you this experience. And I want to ask you to pay attention to the experience and try to hold on to it for the rest of this presentation. So here are some jokes and riddles, and the jokes are courtesy of the great Hank Green. What is the difference? And you can say the answer if you know it. Between a tuna and a piano. What is it? A tuna? What is it? Yes, you can tune a piano, but you can't piano a tuna. Yes, thank you, David Tennant. I think it's funny too. Okay. Why was the sand wet?
It's right next to the beach.
That's a pretty logical answer. That's good, but because the seaweed. Get it? The seaweed. Yes, these are dad jokes. Okay. I stayed up all night because I wanted to see where the sun went. And then it dawned on me. Okay. I cannot believe I just did that. So now for riddles. What two things can you never eat for breakfast?
Lunch and dinner.
Lunch and dinner! That's right. Okay. What tastes better than it smells?
Your tongue.
Your tongue!
She said children.
We're on the same page, Bella.
Oh my gosh. Okay, so what is going on here? It happens, we're going to be on this slide for a long time, so look away if you must. Okay. It happens that there is a whole history from Plato to Kant and beyond of the philosophy of what makes things funny. And of course, psychologists are interested in this as well, including some psychologists we'll talk about. So Plato believed that moments were funny when they allowed us to feel superior over others, like watching someone slip on a banana peel. Right, others added that we don't want to feel too superior. We need to have some empathy, some ability to relate, or it's just cruel. But I think that YouTube, all of the internet, Tumblr, and a lot of Saturday Night Live sort of contradicts this. But this doesn't explain even the simplest jokes, even the dad jokes that I just told you. So another theory, which is expressed in different terms by Kant, who happened to think that humor wasn't good for very much except for jostling our insides, Kierkegaard and Schopenhauer, can be called the incongruity theory or a violation of expectation. So here's a common joke structure. A man walks into a bar and says something. The bartender gives an expected and perfectly reasonable response. The man says something unexpected. Ha ha ha. That's the punchline. So, but it can't be something too unexpected, or it will violate our expectations too much. It would degenerate into nonsense that we can't relate to. It has to take our expectations our common sense, our conventional wisdom, and stretch them just enough to give us a jolt of wakefulness. My brother used to love these penguin jokes. There were two penguins standing on a cliff. One penguin jumps off. The other penguin yells, "Typewriter!" Exactly. So if that is funny at all, and I don't think that it is, it's really, exactly, you don't get it. If it's funny at all, it's really only funny at once, because the joke is that you don't get it. The joke is it's absolute absurdity. So there's nothing to make sense of in that joke, and we love making sense. The human tendency to make sense is irrepressible, including the tendency to make a deeper, more nuanced sense. So according to two psychological researchers, McGraw and Warren, the violation of expectation needs to be relatively benign. It can't challenge our concept of ourselves and our world more than we can cope with. When the violation, and it also shouldn't do actual harm. So when a violation like this is at its worst, it's benign because the person telling the joke has power and is safe, and the person the joke is played on does not have power, like sexist jokes or racist jokes. And the truth that that reveals really is about how limited the consciousness of the joke teller is and what the joke teller is afraid of. But when this violation of expectation is at its best, it points to a bigger meaning. A joke can draw attention to the difference between the word and the actual thing, between the concept and its manifestation. This is from Schopenhauer. And this is particularly true of riddles. I might be wondering what particular things I cannot eat for breakfast. So I don't know, cucumbers might give me heartburn, I probably shouldn't have ice cream this early, but wait. Lunch and dinner. You were asking for a category of a thing, not a particular. And we tend to see the world in categories, in generalities, for the sake of convenience or even the sake of survival. I might spend a lot of my day responding to my ideas about things, a tree, a dog, an enemy, instead of meeting the thing as it is, this tree, this dog, this enemy. And what's an enemy anyway? Jokes and riddles can bring our attention to this fact. Breaking out of this tendency to see in generalities, to see what we expect to see, so that we can see the thing in itself as it actually is in front of us in this moment, is what Henri Bortoft calls de-automatization. De-automatization. We can't just be robots when we're trying to answer a riddle or get a joke. We have to let our consciousness shift in a slight but not entirely expected way. And we have to do this in the context of not destroying natural order, but expanding it. Not unhinging our mind, but opening it. Bortoft calls this a lighting up in consciousness. And I can also forget that a metaphor is a metaphor. We use metaphors all the time, constantly, and they become so concretized that we forget that they're metaphors. So when I say that the sunrise dawned on me, I'm not just making a double entendre. I'm recalling what Barfield calls a forgotten semantic unity, in which the rising of the sun and the rising of an idea in consciousness were each implicitly understood to be particular expressions of one universal truth that meant even more than the two now sundered meanings. I don't have to recognize this fact consciously in order for it to dawn on me. I just have to respond with that spontaneous expression of surprised delight, with laughter. Surprised delight is a wonderful way to meet the world. Spiritual practitioners can spend a lifetime cultivating surprised delight. Think of a baby playing peekaboo. A baby does not yet understand that something can still be there even if she cannot see it. It's a little frightening, a little jolting, but also delightful when the face reappears. The baby has had a small epiphany. This is also the structure of a poem. One of the definitions of a poem is that it contains something called the central silence. In a sonnet, the central silence will come in the last 2 lines. In free verse, it could come anywhere. It's the emotional crux of the poem, the moment when the meaning shifts to be bigger than what was immediately apparent. So let's go through this example together. Because you asked about the line between prose and poetry. Sparrows were feeding in a freezing drizzle that while you watched turned to pieces of snow, riding a gradient invisible from silver aslant to random, white and slow. There came a moment that you couldn't tell, and then they clearly flew instead of fell. Page turn again. Whatever experience you just had, whatever aha moment that poem just gave you, even if you're still a little confused by it, because sometimes you have to read a poem several times, chances are that you are experiencing what Barfield called a felt change in consciousness. He wrote that appreciation of a poem takes place at the actual moment of change. It's not simply that the poet enables me to see with his eyes and so to apprehend a larger and fuller world. He may indeed do this, but the actual moment of pleasure depends upon something rarer and more transitory. It depends on the change itself. Later on the same page, after an illustration of this principle involving electric current, Barfield writes that the poetic mood, like the dreams to which it has oft been compared, is kindled by the passage from one plane of consciousness to another. So it is with a riddle or a joke. In a more homely way, perhaps, but nevertheless, it is so. Whatever that poem said to you, if I explicated it right here and now, if I explained it to you, if I reduced it to other words or substituted long, unlovely, jargony words, the felt change in consciousness would be lost. That aha moment when you think, yes, it's true, that's just how it is, I get it. Why didn't I see it that way before? And realize that you could not express quite the same thing in other words, that is the poetic mood. It is recognition of a familiar truth, of one of the recognizable, expected patterns that makes the world make sense, at the same time that it is a subtler, expanded truth. It's a direct experience of truth, not a description of it. Jokes are funny because they are true. True in a slightly unexpected and thus deeper way. If I have to explain the joke to you, it's not funny. It really isn't. You either get it or you don't. This principle is anti-reductionism. You cannot mistake the concept, model, or the formula for the ultimate reality, if you're an anti-reductionist, that is. Water is not just a certain combination of hydrogen and oxygen. It is thirst and slaking of thirst. It is the smell of rain and dust. Dr. Kufans, what is that? Petrichor. It's the smell of rain and dust and the sound of a brook. It is also more than all of these, including the spiritual reality of quenching a longing. Often in myth, in what Tolkien calls the fairy story, the threshold into a bigger world away from the provincial world of common sense or conventional wisdom is guarded. The hero has to have an exchange of a particular kind before he can move on. In The Hobbit, Bilbo meets Gollum in the caves under Goblin Town. The two, at Gollum's suggestion, engage in a riddle contest. It was at Gollum's suggestion, right? Or was it Bilbo's? Do you ever doubt yourself when you're giving a paper? Anyway, they engage in a riddle contest. Their ability to do so shows that the two are not entirely different from one another, that they share a certain amount of cultural knowledge, that they see the world in similar ways, they have similar expectations, play by similar rules, and they each seem to relish the challenge of mental elasticity that the riddle contest brings. They try, but just like that moment of unsolicited peace that sometimes comes during meditation, it's the moments when they relax their minds, even allowing Providence to step in, that the answers come to them. Bilbo's mind gets stuck, several times actually, and so he makes the biggest shift of all. He violates expectation so much that he spontaneously changes the rules of the game. Bilbo wins. Gollum accepts this challenge, but he's not able to make the required leap, and he loses the game. So of course Bilbo wins and escapes the treacherous Gollum by literally leaping over him into the bigger, brighter world outside. In The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, Lucy Pevensey enters Narnia through the wardrobe. She steps into a place that, like a human being, is bigger on the inside. The first being she meets is Mr. Tumnus. Ordinary in his way, carrying packages home after errands, he is also quite extraordinary. He is a faun, and he has never seen a human or a daughter of Eve before. Mr. Tumnus listens to Lucy's explanation of where she came from, the wardrobe in the spare room. He tries to stretch his mind to understand, but he can't help putting what Lucy tells him in terms that he actually can understand easily. Daughter of Eve, he says, from the far land of Spare where eternal summer reigns around the bright city of Wardrobe, how would it be if you came and had tea with me? Tumnus's request has the effect of rendering the seemingly mundane world from which Lucy came a bit more wonderful. Tolkien says that we stop seeing things because we get used to them. He says that we need to clean our windows so that things seen may be freed from the drab blur of triteness, from what he calls appropriation, from having already made up our minds about them. Lewis's linguistic joke invests the dusty wardrobe from which Lucy emerged with what Tolkien calls an arresting strangeness. It helps us to remember that to other eyes, it is our world that is exotic and magical. Most probably, wrote G.K. Chesterton, we are in Eden still. It is only our eyes that have changed. So let me talk to you about one last kind of humor. Yes, I'm going there. Transgression. Transgressive humor. Transgression in humor mirrors transgressive religious practices, such as certain tantric practices, the Stoic philosopher Marcus Aurelius's shocking physico-realistic descriptions of the parts of life that we tend to sentimentalize. He would describe things like falling in love and all kinds of things in just really gross biological terms to get us to shock us, to shock himself, really, jolt himself into wakefulness. But the most notable example of this in the Western tradition is the practices of cynic philosophers. Cynic spiritual practices consisted of defying social norms, basically being rude and gross in public, in order to question the ultimate spiritual value of those norms. The role of the transgressive practitioner, or the sacred or the ritual clown, is for advanced spiritual practitioners only. Do not try this at home. How many of you have played Cards Against Humanity and are willing to admit it? You guys have? Oh my gosh.
So much fun.
Every single YA member has played Cards Against Humanity.
I have.
RJ has it. Okay, so for those of you who haven't, Cards Against Humanity is a kind of fill-in-the-blank game in which the object is to complete a statement in as shocking and hilarious a manner as possible. It is not fun to play Cards Against Humanity with someone who genuinely espouses vile beliefs. The humor lies in its conscious transgressiveness. Transgressions that are rendered benign because we know that we don't really mean them, or just because we're able to take them out and look at them in the face and laugh at them, the way Lewis laughs at devils in the Screwtape Letters. Playing this game can cause you to take a good, hard look at yourself and your friends. What values do you really hold dear? What are cultural norms that you're merely parroting? Do these cultural norms still serve us? It can be fun to be horrible for a while, but it's not for the faint of heart. Transgressive humor, or the role of the sacred clown, often has an apotropaic purpose, a warding off of evil. In the sacred drama, the transgressive figure often protects the innocent by distracting the forces of evil with chaos, the way masked figures sometimes taunt the crowd while the image of the Virgin Mary is being paraded through the streets. The transgressive is apotropaic in another way, however. It causes us to see the absurd strutting of our own ego, of our own petty day-to-day concerns. In The Lord of the Rings, Gandalf sometimes fulfills this role. He's not particularly gentle or concerned about fitting in or being liked. He can be ill-mannered and short-tempered. He is never late or early, but arrives when he means to. He follows what might seem to be his own law, but is actually the higher law of the Valar, the demigods who sent him into Middle-earth. He is the... It's for Slytherin. Harry is not yet ready to be a transgressive or a figure or a sacred clown. So he's following what seems to be his own law, but is actually a higher law. He is the advanced practitioner who is so morally mature, so spiritually advanced, that he doesn't have to bow to convention. He follows a higher law. Now, according to the well-known Jesus Seminar scholar, John Dominic Crossan, another figure of this type, who's directly compared to Cynic philosophers, is Jesus. With his violation of dietary and Sabbath laws, his insistence that family roles and loyalties are less important than the truth and change he brings, that the social order shall be upturned, the first last and the last first, Jesus is not subject to the law, but its fulfillment. Only at Real Myth can you go from Cards Against Humanity to Jesus of Nazareth in 3 steps. And I'm saying this as a believer myself. So it's no coincidence that these transgressive figures are often full of good humor, even joyful when it's appropriate for them to be so. We often think of the spiritual path as one of seriousness and self-negation. We remember that Jesus wept, that he suffered, but we forget that everything we know about his associations and his celebrations, his behavior at weddings, how he was accused of being a drunkard and a friend to the outcast, tells us that he probably also laughed, and laughed often. When we abandon ourselves to laughter, we abandon our self-conceit. We let go of our expectations of the world so that we can be surprised, so we can meet it with surprise and even wonder. This allows us to, for at least a moment, step out of the story we are writing for ourselves, or that we think we're writing for ourselves, into the story that has been written for us. Both C.S. Lewis and J.R.R. Tolkien assure us that everything will ultimately have what Tolkien calls the sudden joyous turn, the eucatastrophe, the happy ending. Perhaps the first step to ready ourselves for this happy ending is to take whatever chances we have to take ourselves a little less seriously. Thank you very much. I think we're probably past time, but I'm happy to answer questions or even answer questions while we're cleaning up. I do hope that you will come back tomorrow. Doors open at 9. The keynote speech on the Kalevala is at 10. And Devin, I'm actually hoping you'll introduce that so you can tell people a little bit more about all things. We are going to have the Naiwat Swashbuckler